Today, we're diving into one of the biggest government leaks in American history, the Pentagon Papers. This is the incredible story of a top secret report that basically blew the lid off the hidden truth of a long and really divisive war. So back in 1971, this bombshell report just drops, and it reveals decades of deception about the Vietnam War. This powerful conclusion from a New York Times article years later just nails it. The government's own secret history proved it had been lying. The leak set the stage for this massive showdown between a president and the press. It brought up these huge questions about secrets, about lies, and really about the freedom of speech itself. So how did this all go down? Let's get into it. Okay, so our story really kicks off on a Sunday, June 13th, 1971. The New York Times goes and publishes its first article based on this top secret government study. And with that one move, they ignited an absolute political firestorm. Now, this wasn't just any old document dump. We're talking about the Pentagon Papers, a colossal 7,000-page, 47-volume history of the entire Vietnam conflict. And the crazy part? It was commissioned in 1967 by the Secretary of Defense himself, Robert McNamara, as this sort of encyclopedic history of the war. So what was in these papers that was so explosive? What secrets were worth risking jail time to expose? Well, the answer reveals this pretty shocking pattern of deception that had been going on for years. The papers showed this consistent pattern of deception across four presidential administrations. From Truman all the way to Johnson, the American public was being misled again and again. The U.S. had secretly backed the creation of South Vietnam, given the okay for a coup against its leader, and was planning to expand the war, all while telling everyone they were looking for peace. And the deception wasn't just about policy. It involved covert military actions. It turns out the U.S. was secretly bombing neighboring Cambodia and Laos, expanding the war far beyond what the American people were ever told. An internal memo really laid bare the real motivations for even being in the war. And get this, a staggering 70% of the justification wasn't about winning, but, and I quote, to avoid a humiliating U.S. defeat. And helping the Vietnamese people? Yeah, that was the lowest priority, clocking in at only 10%. So who was brave enough, or maybe reckless enough, to leak a 7,000-page top-secret report? The answer is a man who was, at one time, a true believer. That man was Daniel Ellsberg. He was a military analyst who had actually worked on the study. But as he saw the huge gap between the truth in the documents and the lies being told in public, he had this crisis of conscience. He became convinced the war was immoral. So he and a colleague painstakingly photocopied thousands of pages, and after getting nowhere with Congress, they took them to the press. The moment that first article was published, it kicked off an epic legal battle. The Nixon administration was furious about the leak, and they went head-to-head with the nation's most powerful newspapers in what became a historic First Amendment showdown. President Nixon's administration argued that publishing the papers was a threat to national security. They used the Espionage Act to get a federal court injunction, which is a really rare act of prior restraint, basically government censorship before something is even published, and they forced the New York Times to stop. But the press fought back. Soon, other papers like the Washington Post started publishing their own stories, and the whole case just skyrocketed to the Supreme Court. The fundamental question was this: does the government actually have the power to censor a newspaper? And Justice Hugo Black's opinion here, well, it captured the stakes perfectly. And in a landmark 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court sided with the newspapers. They ruled that the government had failed to meet the really heavy burden of proof required to justify censorship. They said it didn't cause a grave and irreparable danger to the country. It was a huge win. The Supreme Court's decision was a massive victory for freedom of the press, no doubt. But the true impact of the Pentagon Papers was just beginning to unfold. And honestly, it would change America's relationship with its government forever. The fallout was immense. The papers blew this credibility gap wide open, creating this deep public distrust in government that, you could argue, still lingers to this day. And get this, Nixon's illegal attempts to discredit Ellsberg, like breaking into his psychiatrist's office, those became some of the first crimes in the Watergate scandal that would bring down his entire presidency. And because of all that government misconduct, a judge dismissed all the charges against Ellsberg, setting this powerful new precedent for press freedom. And as a final reminder of just how sensitive this information really was, the complete, unedited Pentagon Papers weren't officially declassified and released to the public until June 2011. That's a full 4 decades after they first made headlines. Ultimately, the whole Pentagon Papers saga forced America to confront a really difficult question, one that's just as relevant today as it was in 1971. In a democracy, where should we draw the line between protecting government secrets and ensuring the public's right to know the truth? It's something to think about,